The Awakening. The Late-Night Discovery. Marcus Reed pushed his glasses up his nose and squinted at the quantum field equations sprawled across 3 whiteboards in his MIT laboratory. The digital clock on his desk read 2:47 a.m., but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. For months, he had been working on a theoretical breakthrough that could revolutionize faster-than-light communication, and tonight, the pieces were finally clicking into place. The lab was eerily quiet except for the gentle hum of quantum processors and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment. Marcus had always preferred working alone during these late hours when his mind could focus without interruption. His colleagues often joked that he lived in the lab, and they weren't entirely wrong. Since his divorce 2 years ago, work had become both his passion and his refuge. He stepped back to admire his calculations, taking a sip of his 5th cup of coffee. The equations were elegant, describing how quantum entanglement could theoretically allow instantaneous communication across vast distances. It was purely theoretical, of course, but Marcus felt he was on the verge of something monumental. The impossible event. A strange shimmer appeared in the air near the center of his lab, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. Marcus blinked, thinking fatigue was playing tricks on his eyes. But the distortion grew stronger, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with an energy that made his teeth ache. The quantum processors began beeping frantically, their displays showing readings that defied all known physics. Marcus rushed to his instruments, his scientific mind racing to understand what was happening. The energy signatures were off the charts, exhibiting properties that shouldn't exist according to current scientific understanding. A low harmonic tone filled the room, growing stronger by the second. Marcus felt his hair standing on end as the air crackled with electricity. The shimmer expanded into a perfect oval of swirling energy, and through it, he glimpsed what looked like another room entirely. Before he could process what he was seeing, tendrils of energy reached out from the portal and enveloped him. Marcus tried to run, but his muscles wouldn't respond. The world around him dissolved into brilliant white light, and consciousness slipped away like sand through his fingers. Awakening in another world. Marcus awoke to the sensation of lying on something that felt like liquid crystal that had somehow solidified beneath his body. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to a soft, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The ceiling above him was smooth and curved, covered in patterns that shifted and flowed like living circuitry. He sat up quickly, his engineer's mind immediately cataloging his surroundings. The room was clearly not human in origin. Everything curved organically, with no sharp angles or straight lines. The walls had a translucent quality, as if they were grown rather than built, and veins of bioluminescent light pulsed through them like a heartbeat. Marcus was still wearing his lab clothes, jeans, and a MIT t-shirt, though they felt somehow cleaner than before. His sneakers sat neatly beside what he assumed was a bed, though it looked more like a platform of crystallized energy. The air tasted different, cleaner somehow, with a faint metallic tang that reminded him of the ozone smell after lightning strikes. A soft chime echoed through the room, and a section of the wall simply melted away to form an opening. Marcus stood on unsteady legs, his mind reeling as he tried to make sense of his situation. Through the doorway, he could see a corridor that stretched into the distance, its walls pulsing with the same organic light. First contact. Marcus stepped into the corridor, his footsteps echoing softly on the floor that had a strange give to it, like walking on living tissue. The architecture defied everything he knew about engineering and construction. There were no visible supports or joints, just flowing, organic shapes that somehow managed to be both alien and beautiful. As he walked, he became aware of voices coming from somewhere ahead. They were speaking in a language he had never heard before, with tones and harmonics that seemed to resonate in his chest. Yet somehow, the meaning began to filter through to his consciousness, as if his brain was being taught to understand in real time. The corridor opened into a vast chamber filled with what could only be described as living technology. Surfaces that looked like pearl and coral formed control panels that responded to touch with ripples of light. The ceiling was transparent, showing a view of stars streaking past and patterns that hurt to look at directly. Two figures stood with their backs to him, studying displays that floated in the air like three-dimensional holograms. They were tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, with slender builds that spoke of both grace and hidden strength. Their skin had an ethereal quality, pale, but with an inner luminescence that shifted between silver and blue. When they turned to face him, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The sisters. The two women before him were clearly not human, yet they possessed a beauty that transcended species. Their faces were angular but elegant, with high cheekbones and large eyes that held depths of intelligence and emotion. Their hair fell in complex braids that seemed to incorporate strands of light, pulsing gently with their heartbeats. The taller of the two stepped forward, her movements fluid and purposeful. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones, yet he understood every word perfectly. "Marcus Reed," she said, and hearing his name spoken in that otherworldly voice sent shivers down his spine. "I am Lyra of the Veiltar, and this is my sister Zora. We apologize for the abrupt nature of your arrival, but circumstances required immediate action." Marcus stared at them, his scientific mind struggling to process the reality of the situation. "You're aliens," he said, the words sounding absurd even as he spoke them. "I've been abducted by aliens." The second sister, Zara, moved closer, and Marcus noticed that while she shared Lyra's otherworldly beauty, her eyes held a fiercer light, more emotional and less controlled. "Not abducted," she said, her voice carrying an accent that made each word sound like music. "Rescued. Chosen. Brought to fulfill a destiny that will save both our peoples." The revelation. Lyra gestured to the floating displays around them, which shifted to show images of a world that took Marcus's breath away. Floating cities connected by bridges of living crystal, forests that seemed to glow with their own inner light, and oceans that reflected not just the sky, but seemed to mirror emotions themselves. "This is our homeworld," Lyra explained. "The Veiltar have existed for millennia, Marcus. We have built a civilization based on harmony between technology and nature, between logic and emotion. But we are dying. The images change, showing emptier cities, fewer people, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be hospitals filled with the sick and dying." Marcus's analytical mind immediately began looking for patterns, for explanations. "A genetic bottleneck," he murmured, understanding dawning. "Your population is too small, too isolated. Inbreeding has weakened your gene pool." Zara's eyes flashed with something that might have been admiration. "Your species fascinates us, Marcus Reed. Even in shock, your mind seeks to understand and solve problems. Yes, our males have become increasingly sterile with each generation. Our population dwindles, and soon we will be extinct." Lyra moved to another display, which showed what looked like genetic analysis charts that were far beyond anything Marcus had seen on Earth. "We have studied many species across the galaxy, searching for compatibility. Humans are unique. Your genetic structure, your emotional capacity, your adaptability, you represent hope for our survival." The impossible proposal. Marcus felt the weight of their words settling on him like a physical burden. "What exactly are you asking of me?" he said, though part of him already suspected the answer. Zara stepped closer, close enough that he could see the patterns of light that danced beneath her skin like living tattoos. "In our culture, twin sisters often share a mate," she said, her voice soft but intense. "It ensures genetic diversity and provides emotional stability for our bonding process. We are asking you to consider becoming our mate, Marcus Reed, to join with us and help save our people." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his mind reeling. "You want me to, with both of you, to repopulate your species." The situation was so far beyond his comprehension that he almost laughed. This is insane. You can't just take someone from their life and expect them to. I have a life on Earth. I have work, responsibilities. What responsibilities? Lyra asked gently. What life? You work alone until the early hours of morning, eat meals from packages, and sleep on a couch in your laboratory. Your divorce papers still sit unsigned on your kitchen table because you cannot bear to make the final cut with your past. You are brilliant, Marcus, but you are also alone. The accuracy of her assessment stung because it was completely true. Marcus had been drifting through life since his marriage ended, throwing himself into work to avoid confronting the emptiness that had settled into his daily existence. Growing understanding. Zara moved to a wall that became transparent at her touch, revealing the vast expanse of hyperspace beyond. Stars streaked past in rivers of light, and Marcus realized they were traveling at speeds that should have been impossible. Marcus nodded, suddenly nervous but certain. What do I need to do? Simply trust us, Zara said, taking his hand. The moment their skin touched, warmth flowed between them, and Marcus felt the first stirrings of the deep connection they had described. Lyra took his other hand, and suddenly the warmth became a circuit of energy flowing between all three of them. Marcus gasped as he felt their emotions wash over him. Relief, joy, hope, and underneath it all, a growing affection that was becoming something much deeper. For the first time in years, Marcus Reed felt truly connected to another being. Not just one, but two incredible women who had literally crossed the galaxy to find him. As the ship continued its journey toward an alien world that would soon be his home, Marcus realized he was no longer traveling as a reluctant captive or confused victim. He was traveling as a man who had found his destiny among the stars, ready to help save a dying civilization while discovering depths of connection and love he had never imagined possible. The quantum physicist in him marveled at the impossible science that had made this encounter possible, while the man in him simply marveled at how completely his life had changed. Behind them lay Earth with its familiar sorrows and limitations. Ahead lay a future bright with possibility, adventure, and the kind of deep connection that made everything else seem worth the risk. Marcus squeezed the hands of his alien mates and smiled as the stars sang their ancient songs around them. The genetic crisis that threatened them was not just about fertility. Marcus learned that Veiltar bonding was far more complex than simple reproduction. When they formed emotional connections, their nervous systems literally synchronized, allowing them to share thoughts, emotions, and even memories. This deep bonding was essential to their psychological health, but it required genetic diversity to function properly. As their gene pool had shrunk, their ability to form these deep connections had weakened. Depression, anxiety, and social isolation had become epidemic among their people. They were not just facing extinction through low birth rates, but through the breakdown of the very bonds that held their society together. Growing connections. On his third day aboard the ship, Marcus encountered Zora in one of the observation lounges. She sat before a wall of transparent material that showed the swirling colors of hyperspace, her expression thoughtful and somewhat melancholy. "Regrets?" he asked, settling into a chair that molded itself to his body automatically. She turned to him, and he was struck again by the otherworldly beauty of her features. "Many," she said softly. "We took you from your world without permission. We are asking you to sacrifice everything for people you barely know. It is not honorable." Marcus studied her face, noting the genuine distress in her large eyes. "But necessary." "Necessary," she agreed. "But that does not make it right. In our desperation, we may have become the very thing we never wanted to be, conquerors." The honesty in her voice touched something in Marcus. Here was a being capable of crossing the galaxy, of technologies that seemed like magic, yet she was troubled by the moral implications of their actions. It spoke to a depth of character that he found compelling. "Tell me about the bonding," he said. "What would it actually mean?" Zara's expression softened, and she moved closer to him. "It is difficult to explain in words that your language contains," she began. When Veiltar bond, we open our minds to each other completely. We share not just thoughts, but emotions, memories, even dreams. It creates a connection deeper than anything your species experiences. She paused, seeming to search for the right words. Imagine if you could feel exactly what your partner feels, know their thoughts as clearly as your own, share in their joys, and comfort them in their sorrows, not just through words, but through direct emotional connection. That is bonding. The concept was both fascinating and terrifying to Marcus, and with both of you, at the same time. Sister bonds are special, Zara explained. Lyra and I have shared a connection since birth. When we bond with a mate, he becomes part of that existing network. 3 minds, 3 hearts, acting as one while still maintaining individual identity. The crisis deepens. Later that day, Lyra found Marcus in his quarters, studying holographic displays of Veiltar genetic data. Her usual composed demeanor was cracked with worry. "We received a communication from our homeworld," she said without preamble. "The situation is worse than we thought. 3 more cities have been abandoned as their populations fell below sustainable levels. The Council estimates we have perhaps 50 years before complete social collapse." Marcus looked up from the genetic charts he had been analyzing. "These mutation rates," he said, pointing to the displays. "They're accelerating. Whatever is causing the sterility is getting worse, not better." Lyra nodded grimly. "Our scientists believe it is connected to the breakdown in bonding networks. As we become more isolated, more emotionally disconnected, our bodies are responding by shutting down reproductive functions. We are literally dying of loneliness." The weight of an entire civilization's survival settling on his shoulders made Marcus feel dizzy. "And you think human genetics can fix this?" "Not fix," Lyra corrected. "Bridge. Human genetic material could provide the diversity we need to restart healthy bonding networks. Your emotional complexity, your adaptability, your passion. These could be the keys to our salvation." Marcus stood and began pacing, his mind racing through the implications. "But it would mean giving up everything I am, everything I've ever known. My work, my life, my identity as a human being." "Would it?" Lyra asked gently. "Or would it mean becoming something more than you ever imagined possible?" The test. That night, Marcus was awakened by alarms he felt rather than heard. The ship's harmonics had shifted to urgent, discordant tones that made his teeth ache. He rushed from his quarters to find the corridors filled with flashing lights and the sound of running feet. In the command center, he found Lyra and Zara working frantically at control surfaces that flowed like liquid under their touch. The main display showed what looked like a massive storm in hyperspace, with energy readings that defied comprehension. "What's happening?" Marcus shouted over the noise. "Hyperspace storm," Zara called back, her hands dancing over controls that shifted and changed as she worked. "We can't navigate around it, and our engines can't maintain stability much longer." Marcus looked at the displays, his engineering mind automatically analyzing the patterns. "These energy signatures," he said, moving closer to the readouts. "They're similar to the quantum field distortions I was working on in my lab." Lyra turned to him, hope flashing in her violet eyes. "You understand this phenomenon?" "Maybe," Marcus said, his mind racing. "In my research, I discovered that certain quantum field resonances could create stable pathways through dimensional barriers. If hyperspace works on similar principles." He moved to the controls, surprised when they responded to his touch as readily as they did to the sisters. His hands moved almost automatically, adjusting frequencies and field harmonics based on his theoretical knowledge. "There," he said, as the ship's violent shaking began to subside. "Try those settings." The Veiltar sisters implemented his suggestions, and gradually the ship found stability. The storm continued to rage around them, but they were now riding its currents rather than fighting against them. The decision. Hours later, when they had safely emerged from the hyperspace storm, Marcus found himself alone with both sisters in the observation lounge. The crisis had brought them together in a way that pure conversation never could. He had seen them under pressure, witnessed their competence and courage, and felt the trust they had placed in his knowledge and abilities. "You saved us," Lyra said softly. "Your knowledge, your quick thinking. Without it, we would have been lost in the storm." Marcus shook his head. "We saved us. All three of us, working together." Zara moved closer to him, her eyes bright with an emotion he was beginning to recognize as more than gratitude. "This is what bonding could be like," she said. "Not just emotional connection, but intellectual partnership. Minds working together to solve problems that none could solve alone." Marcus looked between the two sisters, seeing them not as alien beings asking him to sacrifice his humanity, but as women who had already become important to him. The thought of parting from them when they reached their homeworld was becoming more painful than the thought of staying. "If I agree to this," he said slowly, "what happens to Earth, to humanity? Do I ever see my world again?" Lyra smiled, the first truly joyful expression he had seen from her. "Why would you assume you must choose between worlds? Our technology could advance human science by centuries. Our knowledge of genetics could eliminate diseases that plague your people. A bond between our species could benefit both." The possibility opened up vistas that Marcus had never considered. Not abandonment of his humanity, but expansion of it. Not betrayal of his species, but service to it in ways he had never imagined. New beginnings, standing before the vast window that showed the stars wheeling past in their impossible dance, Marcus made his choice. It wasn't really a single moment of decision, but rather the culmination of days of growing understanding, connection, and hope. "Yes," he said simply, and the word seemed to resonate through the ship itself. Zara's face lit up with joy so pure it took his breath away, while Lyra's composed mask finally cracked to reveal depths of relief and happiness that spoke to how much his decision meant to them. "The bonding ceremony will wait until we reach our homeworld," Lyra said, her voice slightly unsteady with emotion. "But if you are willing, we could begin the preliminary connections now." "Look at what we offer," she said softly. "Not just companionship, but adventure beyond your wildest dreams. Technologies that will expand your understanding of the universe. The chance to be part of something greater than yourself." Marcus stared out at the cosmic vista, his mind racing. The scientist in him was fascinated by the implications of their technology, their society, their very existence. But the human part of him was terrified by the enormity of what they were asking. "I need time," he said finally. I can't make a decision like this without understanding what I'm getting into." Lyra nodded, her expression understanding. "Of course. We have a long journey ahead of us before we reach our homeworld. Use that time to learn about us, about our culture, about what this bonding truly means. The choice, Marcus, will always be yours." As they led him through corridors that seemed to respond to their presence, Marcus caught himself stealing glances at the two sisters. They moved with a grace that spoke of perfect coordination, finishing each other's sentences and communicating with looks that conveyed volumes. Whatever they were offering him, it wasn't just about saving their species. It was about connection on a level he had never experienced. The weight of choice. That night, lying on the crystalline platform in quarters they had provided for him, Marcus stared up at the ceiling that showed a real-time view of the stars rushing past. The magnitude of his situation pressed down on him like a physical weight. Somewhere behind him was Earth, his old life, everything familiar and safe. Ahead lay an alien world, and a future he couldn't begin to imagine. The quantum physicist in him was fascinated by the implications of their technology. The way they manipulated matter and energy, their faster-than-light travel, their living ships, it all suggested an understanding of physics that was centuries ahead of human science. To study with them, to learn from them, would advance human knowledge by millennia. But the man in him was terrified. They were asking him to give up everything he had ever known for the sake of beings he had just met, to become intimate with creatures who, for all their beauty and intelligence, were utterly alien, to father children who would be only half human. Yet as he lay there, Marcus found himself thinking about the loneliness that had been his constant companion for the past 2 years. The empty apartment, the silent dinners, the work that had become both his passion and his prison. Maybe Lyra had been right. Maybe he hadn't had much of a life to leave behind. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of floating cities and women with eyes like deep oceans, calling to him across the vast darkness of space. The choice, exploration and wonder. Marcus awoke to soft harmonics that seemed designed to ease the transition from sleep to wakefulness. The past day's events rushed back to him, and he sat up to find that someone had left fresh clothes beside his sleeping platform. They were similar to his own style, but made from materials that felt impossibly soft and seemed to regulate temperature automatically. After dressing, he ventured out of his quarters to explore the ship. The corridors seemed to anticipate his movement, doorways dilating open before he reached them, and soft lighting guiding his path. It was clear that the ship's systems were monitoring him, but rather than feeling invasive, it felt oddly comforting, like being cared for by an attentive host. He discovered gardens that defied all logic, with plants that grew in spirals of light and flowers that chimed softly when touched by the artificial breeze. The air here was perfect, carrying scents that reminded him of spring mornings and ocean breezes. Water flowed in impossible patterns, forming temporary sculptures before dissolving back into streams that fed the luminescent vegetation. In what appeared to be a library, Marcus found himself surrounded by information storage devices that responded to his thoughts rather than his touch. Simply by concentrating on a subject, holographic displays would materialize showing information about Veiltar history, culture, and science. The knowledge transfer was so efficient that he could absorb complex concepts in minutes rather than hours. Understanding the Veiltar. Through the ship's knowledge systems, Marcus learned that the Veiltar civilization was ancient beyond human comprehension. They had achieved interstellar travel when humans were still discovering fire, and had spent millennia perfecting the balance between technology and nature, logic, and emotion. Their society was built on principles of harmony and connection. Individual achievement was valued, but only within the context of how it benefited the whole. They had eliminated war, hunger, and most diseases centuries ago, creating a paradise that had perhaps become too perfect for its own good.